If you asked most people to name a mutiny in the British Royal Navy, the mutiny aboard His Majesty's armed vessel Bounty is the one that most would recall. But it was neither the most violent nor the one that had the most widespread repercussions. However, the unusual nature of the events aboard the Bounty meant that this story has forever earned its place in the public consciousness. Was Lieutenant William Bligh, the captain of the Bounty, really a tyrant? And if so, were his crew justified in taking command? Were the crew unmanageable after spending so long amongst the relaxed natives of Tahiti? Was the Royal Navy remiss in not providing Bligh with a larger vessel and thereby a greater complement of officers and indeed Marines? Some of these questions can be answered by the facts and the evidence. Others are still open to speculation and interpretation. The mission for HMS Bounty was to sail to Tahiti, or Otaheite as it was known at the time, in order to collect breadfruit plants and then to transport them to the West Indies, where they would be replanted and used as cheap sustenance for the slave population in the British colonies. This was the first time that this had been attempted and was an experiment to lessen costs for the plantation owners, instigated primarily by Sir Joseph Banks. As Bligh had previously sailed with Captain Cook on his third ill-fated voyage and therefore knew Tahiti well, he was deemed to be the ideal candidate for the breadfruit experiment. HMS Bounty had had a previous career as a collier and entered the Royal Navy in 1787 as one of its smallest vessels at 220 tons with a length of just 85 feet. Being small, she didn't warrant a full post captain to command, and therefore 32-year-old Lieutenant William Bligh was left disappointed to not be promoted for his mission, although as the ship's commander he was addressed as captain. On the 23rd of December 1787, Bounty and her crew began their journey towards Tahiti. It was Bligh's desire to sail via Cape Horn in South America and across the Pacific, thereby circumnavigating the globe. However, after spending a month off South America battling the elements, the attempt to round Cape Horn was abandoned and the Bounty headed east. During the voyage out, Bligh had found reason to demote his ship's sailing master, John Fryer, and to replace him with Fletcher Christian, the master's mate. Christian, who was originally from Cumberland, had previously sailed with Bligh, and despite their age difference, the two were friends. This demotion of Fryer caused him to have resentment and anger towards Bligh, along with accusations of favoritism. After 10 months of sailing, the Bounty eventually reached Tahiti on the 26th of October 1788. Bligh and those who had visited Otaheite before were greeted as old friends, and those new to the island soon realized that the stories that they had been told of this paradise and its free nature were truer than they could possibly have imagined. To the 44 officers and men of the Bounty, after their 10 months at sea, including their failed attempt to round Cape Horn, the relief of literally falling into the welcoming arms of the islanders must have been very welcome indeed. The crew of HMS Bounty ended up spending far longer in paradise than was initially anticipated. The reason for this was that in order to secure the successful transplantation of the breadfruit, it was decided by the ship's botanist, Peter Nelson, that the plants needed time to mature further before they could be successfully transplanted and survive the journey. During these 5 months, the relations between many of the islanders and the crew became closer and closer. It could be argued that the relaxed atmosphere became an infection from which even the most determined leader would find it hard to recover. Most notably, Fletcher Christian, who became more and more seduced by the island's ways. He eventually married a local woman, Mutiny. Although he was certainly not a flogging captain, Bligh was prone to fits of anger, and this, combined with his personal discipline and desire to run a tight ship, meant that as time dragged on, conflict was inevitable. The frustrations with his officers and crew manifested themselves in public dressing downs from Bligh and the desertion of 3 of the ship's company. On the 5th of April 1789, the Bounty and her reluctant crew finally set sail for the return journey. On the 21st of April, John Fryer recorded in his journal, "Mr. Bligh and Mr. Christian had some words." Christian told Mr. Bligh, "Sir, your abuse is so bad that I cannot do my duty with any pleasure. I have been in hell for weeks with you." And a little later, when the Bounty stopped off at an island in an unsuccessful attempt to take on water, Bligh is recorded to have called Christian a cowardly rascal, asking him if he was afraid of a set of naked savages, while he had arms, the harassment received from these natives being the reason given by Christian for the unsuccessful attempt to take on water. On the 27th of April, when Bligh came up on deck, he noticed that a number of coconuts that had been stored between the guns had gone missing, and proceeded to launch an investigation as to where they had gone. On questioning Fletcher Christian, Christian replied, "I do not know, sir. I hope you don't think I am guilty of stealing yours." To which Bligh replied, "Yes, you damned hound, I do. You must have stolen them from me, or could give me a better account of them. God damn you scoundrels, you combine with the men to rob me." Outside of these outbursts, Bligh continued to behave normally, including inviting Christian to dine with him on a regular basis. Just over 3 weeks into their return journey, on the 28th of April 1789, the infamous mutiny took place. At dawn, whilst he was asleep in his cabin, Captain Bligh was awoken and seized. His hands were bound behind his back by Fletcher Christian and 2 others. Bligh responded by shouting out "murder" at the top of his voice as he was removed to the weather deck, still wearing just his nightshirt. After he was physically forced through the haranguing voices of the crew, Bligh eventually arrived on deck, where later Christian ordered for a boat to be lowered containing Bligh and 17 of his loyal men. The boat upon which this motley crew were loaded was a mere 23 feet in length. Their meagre supplies of 150 pounds of bread, 32 pounds of pork and 28 gallons of water on normal rations would only have lasted 5 days. Bligh later reported that as he was being forcibly removed from his ship, he asked Christian if this treatment was a proper return for the many instances he had received of his friendship. "Consider, Mr. Christian, I have a wife and 4 children in England, and you have danced my children upon your knee." He appeared disturbed by the question and answered with much emotion that Captain Bligh, that is the thing. I am in hell, I am in hell. There were other men still loyal to Bligh, however, due to the size of the launch and the fact that it was already severely overcrowded, these men had no option but to remain with the Bounty. Addressing these men as the small boat pulled away, Bligh is reported to have called out, "Never fear, my lads, I'll do you justice if ever I reach England." The return of Captain Bligh and his loyal followers is one of the most outstanding examples of endurance and navigation in the long history of sea travel. With only his pocket watch and a quadrant, Bligh was able to navigate this tiny vessel over a distance of nearly 7,000 kilometres. Before, exhausted and severely malnourished, for the loss of only one life, that of crewman John Norton, who had been killed by the natives of Tafua, they eventually arrived after 47 days at sea at Timor in the Dutch East Indies. At the court-martial for the loss of his ship, Bligh was exonerated and praised for his tenacity and skill in leading the open ship's launch to safety. Bligh returned to service in the Royal Navy, completing a successful breadfruit mission and participating honourably and bravely in the battles of Camperdown in 1797 and Copenhagen in 1801. However, mutiny continued to dog his career, as he was also embroiled in the mutiny at the Nore in 1797 and the Rum Rebellion of New South Wales in 1808. Following Bligh's departure from the Bounty, Fletcher Christian sailed to the island of Tabui, where the mutineers spent 3 months in an unsuccessful attempt to settle before eventually returning to Tahiti, where 12 of the mutineers and 4 of the men loyal to Bligh left the ship. Christian finally set sail from Tahiti with the remaining 8 crewmen, 6 Tahitian men and 11 women, seeking a place to settle where they would avoid discovery by the Royal Navy. This journey took them to a number of islands before eventually, on the 15th of January 1790, they landed at Pitcairn Island. The position of Pitcairn had been incorrectly marked on the official Royal Navy charts, giving the Bounty's unique complement a better chance of avoiding detection. After landing, the Bounty was deliberately destroyed by fire, presumably in order to prevent its detection. This new colony on the island of Pitcairn was not altogether successful. Jealousies and infighting saw the numbers greatly reduced, particularly because of tensions between the Tahitians and the Bounty's former crew. There are various reports surrounding the ultimate fate of Fletcher Christian. Most likely, he was murdered in 1793 along with 4 other mutineers. There were rumours that Christian had committed suicide and even that he had eventually found his way back to England. However, this seems highly unlikely. The mutiny aboard HMS Bounty has provided ideal fodder for Hollywood. but unfortunately most of these attempts to tell the story have produced highly inaccurate caricatures of the men and events from those fateful days in 1789. The notable exception, however, is the 1984 film The Bounty, starring Anthony Hopkins and Mel Gibson. Was Bligh a tyrant? Was Christian the innocent victim? Was the Admiralty to blame for under-equipping the expedition? These questions and many others are still open to investigation and interpretation. What is clear, however, is that history never provides anything as convenient as a black and white case.